Alright, here we go. So, I am on the subject of overwhelm today. Overwhelm is something that has been kind of like a topic of sparking a lot of interest for me lately for very specific reasons. Throughout my entire life, I have experienced very profound levels of overwhelm. And as I'm finding myself in this process of healing now, a thought keeps coming up. And that thought is, instead of getting stuck inside of the overwhelm, seek solutions, right? And more often than not, a far majority of the time, overwhelm, well, I would argue that overwhelm is just not necessary in and of itself, first and foremost, but looking at how often solutions are available and how even more so often we find ourselves consumed by overwhelm unnecessarily. It's like looking at, there's a helicopter going by. Just kind of like looking at, okay, there are solutions. What are those solutions? And spending as little time as possible in overwhelm. Because I can tell you right now, overwhelm is just not necessary. Overwhelm occurs because we're not looking at things correctly, in my opinion. It's like, okay, why are you overwhelmed? You're overwhelmed because of this, that, and the other. Okay, well, what is required to subside the issue that is this, that, and the other? Maybe it's communication. Maybe it's, I don't know, a decision. Maybe it's, yeah, I don't know. It could be anything. Maybe it's a lack of insight. Maybe it's whenever you're overwhelmed, it's because something is lacking. But that something that is lacking doesn't mean that it can't be there altogether. And I think that a lot of people have a tendency to like look at that and be like, yeah, no, it's just not possible at all. And no, it's not that way. It's not that it's just not possible at all. It's a matter of perspective. It's a matter, like, for instance, here's an example. And I think that this kind of puts things into perspective. If you are feeling, I don't know, maybe for instance, lonely, is there a solution? I would argue yes. Is there somebody in your life that you could reach out to that would, I don't know, help you kind of like close or remove that feeling of loneliness? Perhaps there is. Okay, wonderful. There's a solution. Therefore, do you need to be overwhelmed? No, you don't. I'm fascinated by how often solutions are available to issues or situations or problems. But yeah, this is something that I've been talking to my sweetheart about, and I find it very interesting because like a very common theme or element that I've noticed throughout my entire life is it's kind of like unnecessary, like it's like, okay, that's a trauma response. Chill the fuck out, take a breath, get present again, and explore potential solutions. And that's exactly what I'm going after here. I think that solutions are not explored enough, and I think that people get caught up inside overwhelm. First and foremost, trauma responses are a thing in and of itself because it's kind of just like, it's an experience of, you're probably triggered by something, and that is keeping you locked inside of a very specific, I don't know, experience mentally and emotionally. And it's very challenging not to get consumed by that stuff, especially when, by the way, trauma responses are a result of comfort and familiarity. So the very reason that we experience something is because something in childhood told us that, I wouldn't even argue that even though it's not normal, just something in childhood, wow. That bird's got a lot to say. Might as well just let them do the talking. Something, I'm going to try to keep going even with this loud bird. Something in childhood taught us that whatever it is that happened or was happening paints comfort and familiarity, right? And so not only do we just kind of like default go to overwhelm, but we actually also seek situations that lead to that kind of stuff, right? Overwhelm, fear, stress, anxiety, depression, all of that stuff actually becomes familiar. And not only familiar, but it becomes something that we're comfortable with. And anything outside of that sometimes, not even sometimes, oftentimes does not make sense. So this whole thing of overwhelm often happens because it's what we're used to. And we actually find comfort, familiarity, and safety within it, even though it's not beneficial for us. So isn't that wild, right? So, you know, and for me too, like growing up, there were a number of things that brought me to feel overwhelmed. But what's interesting is that as trauma responses, I actually have found myself seeking situations that entail stress and overwhelm in them. And I look at that and I'm like, wow. It's funny. It really is funny. But, yeah, overwhelm is not necessary if there are solutions. And more often than not, there are solutions. And the beautiful thing about kind of like looking at situations and not really seeing solutions right off the bat is it challenges you to think outside the box. And that's important because if you're just approaching life from the same standpoint over and over and over again, chances are you're just experiencing the same thing. And why is that an issue? Well, because that doesn't allow for any room for new energy to come in. Yeah, there's a whole lot to this stuff, and it's very interesting when you explore it from a standpoint of conscious awareness. So the question is not about whether... I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. Here's what I would argue. Overwhelm is unnecessary. Why? Because it, like, paralyzes you, right? And instead of running around like a chicken with your head cut off, right, you could default right to action, right to solution-based stuff, thinking, you know, acting, all that kind of stuff. And it completely clears out unnecessary bullshit. And I just find it absolutely fascinating how productive that is. You'll never... I don't think anyone will ever find overwhelm productive. Think about that. Really, think about that for a second. There is zero efficiency or productivity in overwhelm. That's real. There is zero efficiency or productivity in overwhelm. It's just the way that it works. So yeah, always seek solutions.